Good afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students. Thank you, sit down. Okay, could you now please double check in your booklet on Introduction to Climate? And you will see now that we are on the last pages of that particular booklet. And we should be on part 4. And the topic on part 4 is climate and natural vegetation. Our work on climate and natural vegetation will be actually in 2 parts. The first part on climate, I will go through with you on certain important factors that contribute to what makes climate different in one location to the other. And the second part, which is going to be on natural vegetation, is going to be the one that you will actually work on as a major assignment. And that assignment will be given to you to work on with guidelines. And then you will be required to work in groups. And the assignment will be in 2 parts. You will actually do the presentation of what you research on individually, and you will be assessed on it. And at the same time, as a group, you are going to be working on a particular vegetation type that will be allocated to your group. And whatever information you will be collecting and compiling will also be used for assessment of your group work. I will explain a little bit more on that assignment when we come to the topic on natural vegetation. But we are starting now on the topic or chapter 4 in our booklet, and we'll start off by looking at climate. Okay, from what we have already covered on our work or in our work in looking at climate, we found out that climate is looking at the average conditions of the atmosphere over a longer period of time. There are 3 very important controls or factors that makes climate different from one place to the other. What are those 3 factors that we have already studied that contributes to what makes climate different? Anyone from the class? The 3 important factors which makes climate different, what are they? Kiran, can you think of one of those important factors which are also considered as controls that determines or that makes climate different from one place to another?
Temperature.
Okay, very good, temperature. Temperature is a very important control of climate. We also looked at the different factors which makes temperatures different from one place to another. And those factors, if we had to list them, recapping again on them, they are latitude, altitude, aspect, distance from the sea, cloud cover, amount of pollutants in our atmosphere, and etc. Okay, that is one of the important factors or controls of climate, temperature. What are the other 2 important factors or controls of climate? Shelley, give me one or the other one, the other control of climate.
Precipitation.
Okay, good, precipitation. Any form of moisture that falls out of the sky. Precipitation can be in solid, liquid, or gas state. Finally, the last control of climate. Francis?
Pressure.
Pressure. Okay, very good. So those are the 3 important controls. Knowing those different factors which also contributes to variation or what makes climate different, we are now going to look at the distribution of world climates, and our work is going to see us look at 3 major climatic regions and a further subdivision within those 3 major climatic regions. And the subdivisions will be mainly according to temperature. The difference in temperature then will allow one area to have a slightly different climate from another area. So let's look at our work now from our booklet. And from your booklet, you are going to see that climate can actually be divided, climate types, can be divided into 3 main groups. On the board, I have put here the tropical climates. Those are the climates that are found within equator at 0 degrees to 23 degrees north and 23.5 degrees south. I'll repeat that again. The tropical climates, they are the climates that are found within 23.5 degrees north and 23.5 degrees to the south. Those are the tropical climates. Then we come to the temperate regions of the world. There are also further subdivision of different temperate climates that we will look at in our next lesson. And finally, climate can also be classified as polar climates. And again, polar is a big region. Under polar climates, we will look at the subdivision. Make reference to your booklet on page 17, and you will see a list, and that list given gives you an idea on the different types of climate that we are going to discuss in our lesson. Okay, if we had to look at our booklet on page 16, you will see there the further subdivision of those three major climates. We can have the equatorial environments, the tropical maritime environments, the monsoon environments, the desert environment, savanna environments, Mediterranean environment, the cool temperate oceanic environments, the cool temperate interior environments, the cold continental environments, and the tundra environments. And because they're looking at environments, it is not isolated. We are dealing with climates, and we can also say climatic areas, or we are looking at those different environmental areas and their climate. We'll start off in our lesson today, and by the end of our lesson, we should be able to identify those 5 climatic examples which comes under the tropical climate. And when we look at those 5 climatic subdivisions, it will be important that we are able to identify, first of all, number 1, where are those climatic regions found within the tropics, but where are they found? Are they found on the eastern side of the continents? Are they found on the western side of the continents? Are they found in higher altitudes within the tropical regions? That's important. We must be able to identify, number 1. Number 2, we are also going to look at some important characteristic of that particular climate, so we are able to recognize that climate type should we be given information about it. Let's take, for example, on the eastern side, a climate which is found on the eastern side, but within the tropical regions, where the southeast trade winds are dominant and bring in a lot of rain, mainly to those southeastern or the eastern side of the areas in the tropical area. Then those areas would be said to having tropical maritime type climate. The characteristic is the southeast trade winds bringing a lot of rain to the eastern sides. Therefore, location of that climate, it will be mainly on the eastern sides of continents between 0 to 23.5 degrees north and south. And that's what we are going to actually look at for those 5 climatic types which are under the tropical climates. Okay, so we go over now to the information from the monitor. And from the monitor, the information that is given there reads, tropical climates, they are found in the low latitudes of the world. When we talk about low latitudes, we are making reference to the degrees. We start off at the equator at 0 degree. As we go towards the north and the south pole, we will end up to 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south. So the lower latitudes are those areas which are closer to the equator. If we are looking at the tropical areas, then the tropical areas will be 23.5 degrees to the north to 23.5 degrees to the south. Those are all the areas within the tropical region. For those tropical climates, since the sun is overhead or nearly overhead throughout the year, solar radiation is fairly intensive. And therefore, all of these climates that are found within the tropical areas tend to be warm to hot. Except for highland areas within the tropical regions, these regions rarely experience cold. And although there may be a marked cooler season, they have been called the climates without winters. There are 5 major tropical climates which are recognized. One of the important characteristics that you will pick up from this particular introduction is the fact that those climates which are under tropical climates, they are fairly, in terms of temperature, they have warm to hot temperatures right throughout the year. And the reason for why the temperatures are warm to hot is because the sun is directly above or nearly overhead those areas throughout the year. We move on now to looking at the first of the examples, starting from the equator, if we had to look at the cross-section from the equator and as we are moving our way towards the North Pole and the South Pole. Okay, we have the first of those tropical climates, and the first of the tropical climates then is the equatorial climate. Can you make reference to your booklet also? You will see the letter A representing the first of the climates found closer to the equator, and they are the equatorial climate types. Okay, the equatorial climates. One of the important characteristics of this particular climate is the fact that it occurs mainly on the lowland areas close to the equator. Most of this climate type would usually lie between 5 degrees to the north and 5 degrees to the south of the equator. So if we look at the cross-section, a cross-section to show us the climatic type, 5 degrees to the north and 5 degrees to the south. This area here, this region, would be said to have what we call the equatorial climate. So I'll put down the letter A to represent the equatorial climate. So if you are within the area 5 degrees north of the equator, 5 degrees south of the equator, then those areas are said to have the tropical climate known as equatorial climate. Other important characteristics of this particular climate, the equatorial climate, is that it is mainly found on the lowland areas. So we don't look at the high mountain areas within 0 to 5 north and 0 to 5 south. We are looking at the lowland areas of that latitude. These regions, they experience hot conditions in all seasons with almost no range in temperature throughout the year. Remember when we were doing work on climographs, we looked at calculation of temperature range. When we are calculating temperature range, we are finding the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature. If you were in this particular region, then you will find that there is very little or hardly any big difference in the temperature. The highest temperature might be 26 and the lowest temperature might be 25. So there is only a range of 1 degree Celsius. Or you might have the highest temperature as 27.5 and the lowest temperature as 26.5. The temperature range is very little, or there is hardly any difference in the highest and the lowest temperature. So that is a characteristic of the equatorial type climate in terms of temperature range. Another important characteristic of this climatic type, the equatorial climate, because they lie in the belt of equatorial low pressure systems, it is also very humid and wet all year round. You remember the work we did on pressure belts? The doldrums. The doldrums is right where the equator is. The doldrums is a low pressure belt. Because the air rises, it creates an area of low pressure. And low pressure is always associated with rainfall or precipitation. Therefore, around this area, there will always be a lot of rainfall. So the pressure belt is an important climatic control that is to do with pressure, rainfall, an important climatic control, and temperature. The three important climatic controls we have discussed, it fits in with the description for this climatic type A, equatorial. Any questions? Any questions from the class on that first example? No questions? Okay, let's look at some other information to do with equatorial climate. Remember, our work on climate is to do with interpretation of climographs. There will be some examples of climographs that will be also shown for each of those different climatic environments that we are going to be studying. Let's look at the location of this particular type climate. The areas that are actually shown in red, you will note they are also within 0 to 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Here's the equator that runs right across here. So we got 5 south, 5 to the north, and those climatic types that we've mentioned, especially on equatorial climates, are actually found where the red color is. One of the countries that is actually selected for our case study is that of Singapore. Besides Singapore, what would be the other countries that you could also pick up by looking at that map? Silo, besides Singapore, which other countries from that world map will also have the equatorial type climate characteristics?
Indonesia.
Indonesia, definitely correct, yes. It's shaded in here. So Indonesia, definitely. Ovio, give me another country according to our map that would experience this type of climate.
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea, definitely, yes. We look at Papua New Guinea, we have equatorial type climate. When we look at Papua New Guinea, we are mainly concentrating in the lowland areas of Papua New Guinea because our highland areas of Papua New Guinea might have a slightly different type of characteristic compared to what we have there. Any others beside Indonesia, Singapore, and Papua New Guinea? Moses, can you give me maybe other regions or other countries that you can pick up from this particular map?
Brazil.
Okay, Brazil is correct, yes. This area here experiences the equatorial type climate. And also we have the section here in Africa. The Congo Basin or the Zaire Basin are some of the examples here. If we look very carefully at those regions in comparison, we are also going to find that these areas, they tend to have a similar type of vegetation. And the vegetation type of these areas here will be mainly equatorial rain forest. So when we are dealing with climate, if we look at our topic on the board there, it talks about climatic regions and natural vegetation. And I told you in the beginning that we will see it in two parts. We'll start off by looking at the climate, and then later on we'll look at the natural vegetation of those regions. Okay, so those are the regions of the world that experiences the equatorial type climate. If we had to sum up, if we had to do a summary of the equatorial climate, the table that we have on the monitor there would be a good one to sum up this type of climate. Okay, let's look at the table, and perhaps I'll give you at least time to make note of it. The equatorial climate, look at the temperature. Summer is hot, winter is hot. You might be thinking summer and winter, they are not distinctive as in summer, all trees maybe blooming, and then straight after that we have autumn where all the leaves start to fall. No. Within the equatorial climate, there are two distinctive seasons only. They are the hot and dry or the hot and wet season that occurs. When it is summer, generally the place would be hot. When it is winter also, the temperature, it would be hot. So it's hot all year round. Precipitation in the equatorial climatic regions, it is very heavy, more than 1,500 millimeters per annum or per year. Seasonal, in terms of rainfall, rain actually occurs in all seasons within the equatorial climate. What would be the main controls then? The main control would be the low pressure belt or the doldrum, which brings in a lot of convectional rain in all seasons. Because we are at the equatorial low pressure belt, the doldrums, the air always rises, resulting in rainfall, which is mainly convectional all year round. Okay, I'll stop here for that summary, and I'll give you at least 1 minute to make note of that table. Okay, we all made note of that information? Okay, good. Let's look at a sample of what the climograph of any area which has an equatorial climate would look like. We've done a lot of work on climographs, interpretation, and reading information from it. Because we're looking at Singapore as our case study, it is this section here. From this point to that point we'll make reference to. You look at the rainfall. Rainfall per month is about 250 millimeters. That's a lot of rain per month. And you can see the high rainfall right throughout the year. So for this type of regions, rainfall is high right throughout the year. Okay? You look at the temperature, the line graph here showing that. Very little variation. The temperature range would be maybe 1 or 2 degrees Celsius or less than that. We have about 26 degrees and the lowest about 25 degrees. And the temperatures are hot and they are also high right throughout the year. So that's what the climograph of an equatorial climate type would look like. Any questions on the climograph? Mason? No question? Okay, the two things that is important that you are able to pick up. Number one, location of this climate, the equatorial climate. And number two, the important characteristics that make up this particular climate type. We'll move on to the second, tropical climate. So you can check your booklet. The second tropical climate now is the tropical savanna. Okay, so I'll put up on the board B and B to represent tropical savanna. The tropical savanna climates or environments are also, can also be referred to as the tropical continental. So when we talk about the tropical continental, environment, we are referring to the tropical savanna. For tropical savanna, and for us to be thinking about the environment, because we live in Port Moresby is a very good example of an environment which has characteristics of tropical savanna. Let's look at the location of this particular climate. So if we had to put it on our cross-section, from 5 to about 15 degrees. Okay, so from this area here, 5 to 15. In the north and in the south, we would have what we call the tropical, continental, or the tropical savanna type climate. Let's find out a little bit about this climate type. It is found in the areas to the north and to the south of equatorial climatic regions. Tropical continental or tropical savanna, they lie mostly between 5 degrees and 15 degrees north and south latitude. But it is also important to note that they lie inland away from east coasts, which experience a different type climate. Therefore, if you were living between 0 to 5 degrees north and you were on the eastern coast of or within these areas, then your climatic type will not be tropical savanna. It will be a different climatic environment. But if you are living 5 to 15 degrees north or 5 to 15 degrees south, inland or on the western side of the continent, then definitely you would be experiencing the tropical savanna climate. In this climatic type, summers are hot and winters are warm to hot. Because these areas experience the equatorial low pressure systems, especially in summer season only, their summers will be wet, but their winters without the low or moist onshore winds are very dry. So there is a very important characteristic that is actually mentioned in the last part of that statement. And that statement again, I'll repeat, because the tropical savanna areas experience the equatorial low pressure systems in summer only. Their summers are wet. Remember, low pressure is always associated with precipitation. And because the tropical savannas experience the low pressure systems in summer seasons only, their summers are wet. When it comes to winters, the winters are without the lows or the moist onshore winds, therefore the winters are dry. Some people will tell you that the easiest way to actually recognize and remember the tropical savanna type environment is to note that this type of climate, there is what we call a distinctive wet and dry season. And perhaps that's the easiest to remember, because in Port Moresby also, we live here, and we are able to also work out that there is a distinctive dry season and there is a distinctive wet season. And any areas that experience the tropical savanna have distinctive wet and dry. Any questions? No questions? Okay, let's move on to looking at some of the regions around the world which experiences this type of climate. If you look very carefully at the map, you will find that we are moving away from the equator. Remember when we started, we had a map showing those areas here for equatorial climate. Now we are moving away from 5 degrees north and south, and we are going from 5 to about 15 north, 5 to about 15 to the south. The regions of the world which experiences this type of climate, as shown on the map, are regions which include Australia. Okay, so the northern part of Australia here. See the section in Papua New Guinea here, Port Moresby, would be a very good example of an area with a tropical savanna type climate. We also have sections of Africa that experiences this particular type climate. And then we also have in America, South America, sections in South America that experience this type of climate or have this type of climatic environments. Okay, if we had to be specific with the names of those regions, you have the northern part of Australia, the central areas of India, and the inland parts of Southeast Asia, central, northern, and eastern, and also central southern Africa, the Guyana Plateau in northern South America, and the Brazilian Plateau of South America are some of those regions in the world that experience the the tropical savanna climate. So the map of the world there shows us areas that experiences this type of climate. Questions? None? Okay, we move on. Like what we have done for the equatorial climate, a summary. I'll look at that quickly and then I'll ask you to go through by making note of that into your exercise book. Okay, look at the temperature of the tropical savanna climate. The summer is hot. We said winter is warm to hot in terms of temperature. Precipitation in this region or environmental type, moderate to heavy rainfall or precipitation. And it is also important to note that precipitation is more than 500 millimeters to 1,000 millimeters per annum. Seasonal precipitation, wet summers, dry winters. So in a tropical savanna climate, summers are wet, winters are dry. Important controls. Low pressure belts in summer bringing convectional rain. Dry continental air masses in winter also bringing drought. Okay, I'll give you a minute to make note of the summary. Six. Okay, all made note of that information? Okay, because we're also running out of time, we might only have time to look at the introduction of the third climate type, and then the other two we will look at it in our next lesson. So I will only introduce the next climate, which is still within the tropical region, and that's going to be the tropical maritime or the tropical east coast climate. Before we look at the tropical maritime or the tropical east coast climate, again, a climograph giving us an example of the tropical savanna type climate. You can see here a very big range in temperature can actually occur simply because winters are warm to hot and summers are hot. So there will be actually a big difference in terms of difference between the highest and the lowest temperatures. So the line graph here might be a good indication to show that obviously in terms of temperature range, we'll have a larger range than the equatorial type. Look at the rainfall. The rainfall for the selected area in Nigeria, you can see here distinctive wet season and also dry season. These are the areas where a lot of rain is falling in the middle of the months. The beginning and the end months are the dry months. So by looking at this climograph, both the temperature and the rainfall, especially the rainfall, you can say that there is distinctive wet and dry season in this type of climatic environment. If there are no questions, we will move on then only to looking at the introduction of the next climate, and then the rest of the information we will continue on in our next lesson. Okay, the next climate, which is I'm going to make that sea, still a tropical climate, and this time it's a tropical maritime. The word maritime has to do with the sea. So this is a climate which is found in the tropical regions, and it is greatly to do with the influence from the sea. The location of this particular climate is similar to the tropical, continental, or the savanna climate. It is found on about 5 to 15 degrees to the north and the south, but on the eastern sides of continents. In the tropical savanna, this is mainly inland and the western side, whereas the tropical maritime, it will be on the eastern side. One might be wondering, why on the eastern side? Remember our work on winds, pressure belts, between 0 to 30 degrees. Winds blow from the high pressure 30 degrees towards the low pressure at the equator. The winds that are blowing in the southern hemisphere are the southeast trade winds. In the northern hemisphere, between 30 to 0, they are the northeast trade winds. Because they are coming from the southeast direction and the northeast direction, most of the moisture would have fallen on the eastern side of the landmass before they reach the western side. Therefore, all of those areas within 5 to 15 degrees north and south of the equator on the eastern side have a lot of influence of the trade winds. And the trade winds bring a lot of moisture and rain with them, resulting then in them having what we call a tropical maritime or east coast climate. So from the introduction there, it tells us that the tropical east coast in the same latitudes as the tropical savannas are much wetter, because not only do they receive the equatorial lows bringing rain in summer like the savannas, but they have onshore easterly winds or the trade winds bringing rain most of the rest of the year. Summers are hot and winters are hot to warm and heavy all-season rainfall, although summers are usually wetter than winter. Winters are slightly cooler in terms of temperature and drier than the equatorial climates. Okay, and as I've mentioned, I'll only look at the introduction to the tropical maritime climate, and we look at the rest of the information in our next lesson. Is there any questions that you'd like to ask with regards to those three climate types that we have looked at today? Okay, perhaps we come to the cross section here on the board. I have the letter A and B. Where should I place the letter C? Where B is. Okay, good. Because it also occurs within these latitudes. The only difference is that C is on the east coast. Okay, and B, it's looking at inland and mainly towards the west coast. So you see, the reason for why the tropical savannas have distinctive wet and dry season, the dry season especially, is because when the trade winds, they come in, they're coming on the east coast, and most of the moisture is dropped on the east. By the time they receive or they come to the interior or the west coast, within those latitudes, 5 to 15, they are dry. Therefore, we have the distinctive wet and dry for the tropical savanna. Okay, if there are no questions, that will also bring us to the end of our lesson for today. Class, if you could stand up now, please. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 126 is controls. Good afternoon and thank you, students.